Travis Audubon Society. Glad to have you here. I was reading this morning in a paper. There's about around an average of about 600. We know about an average of 611 people in the U.S. that we can recognize or know by name. And some of us know each other pretty well, some of us don't. We may have some new people here. So when you're one of these that knows 611 people, maybe it's gonna be 612 or 13 when they get done. So we may have somebody that hasn't been to a Audubon meeting here before. And if that's the case, we'd like you to stand and tell us who you are and where you're from, so we can welcome you.
I'll stand up.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Kat and I'm just moved here about 7 years ago. And someone in town told me about these meetings. It was because I'm a nurse. And my dad, Jim, he just moved in next door to me. And we kind of like watching birds, and this is my boyfriend Ben. And so I invited them to come tonight. So.
Well, very nice to have you here. Appreciate it. Yep. Anybody else? Definitely not Francis. He's been here longer. Throwing moss on him, I think, back there. So we're attempting some new things with our Zoom. We got a lot of things worked out thanks to John and Tom and Francis. And so we're gonna be able to use the microphones different, I hope. And we'll welcome our Zoom people that are on Zoom from wherever you are in the country or in town. And this meeting will be recorded and you can pick it up on the website, as are the last few years of meetings that we've had that we recorded. If you want to look at some again or some interest or whatever, great. So we have treats, as you know, back to homemade treats. And tonight they're from Sharon Blau, Karen Golden, Mary Norton, and Phil Ludet. Did I say that right? Lord. Oh, I didn't see my R in there. Okay, sorry. Phil. And so thank you to those people. And I'm going to send around a sheet for the rest of for March and April. And if you can bring some treats for us, put your name and phone number, and also a drink too. If you have a jug of juice or something you can bring, that'd be great for the next couple of meetings that we have here. And somebody will call you to remind you ahead of time. So that would be Charlene. So I'll send this over here and appreciate it. Oops. So this weekend is the Great Backyard Bird Count from Cornell Lab. Starts Friday, ends Monday, and you don't have to be an expert or anything. There's just a protocol of watching birds in your yard or wherever. And you send them, keep track of the most birds that you see at one time. So if you have like 3 chickadees coming to your feeder all at once, and you would count them, but if you have one come every 5 minutes or so, it'll be 1. So it's all that you would see at one particular time. A lot of us have done that. You know, you can do it for a couple minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or all day, or some more of your choosing. But just look up Great Backyard Bird Count, and you can be involved in citizen science. Tonight we have a big silent auction. Over here we have some new books, puzzles, a lot of stuff. We even got some garbage cans. Some steel ones, and those are great for storing your bird seed in and keep the mice and stuff out. I have one in my garage, a small one. You can put 50 pounds of bird seed in there. Last long. There you go. And
got some ear corn here too.
ear corn too, great.
$3 a bag.
Okay, ear corn, got some good deals. And so you want to look through there, it might be find some books or so, and do your early Christmas shopping. So bid high, bid often is what they say. We'll close that about 10-15 minutes after the meeting. You can get some treats and hang around. And then it's Ken back here over us raising his hand. I'll take care of money and things like that. Speaking of which, you'll see there's a donation box.
Right here.
And And we put a note in our newsletter, I don't, everybody had heard or not, I think a number of you were, at the funeral. Pat Dell passed away, a month or so, 6 weeks or so ago. And, she's the one that ran the bird store for us at Gilbertville, and we bought a lot of seed, and she's supported the community there. And a lot of the bird feeders that are at Georgia With are donated from her. Just a wonderful lady, and it was sorry to have her pass away. But we already received a check from the family that for a memorial account that we'll decide what we're gonna do. So if you decide you want to donate to that cause for Pat, anything that goes in that box tonight will go to the family, and we'll decide about a grant or some kind of way to recognize her and remember her legacy with us as a board member here. And she goes back a long time, and for all the support and things that she did. And we do have a memorial account. We got a lot of memorials last year, and we have a line item at Hartman Reserve for memorials. And if you haven't been there, look at the bird setup that they have back there. It's incredible. About 15 feeders and nice library to sit and watch things, and native garden, and some memorial things for people that donated. So that's great. So progress. So we're working on the Zoom, and a number of us are at the Nature Summit that was last November in Des Moines, and 4 of our board members went. It was 2 days of really fantastic panels of all kinds of things on health, legislature, tourism. And we learned that tourism is what drives Iowa. There's twice as many jobs in tourism as there is in agriculture, believe it or not. We have things that are concerned about with our environment. A lot of young people were there. It's going to be again next year, 14th and 15th. There's time well spent. So this was not a time to go there and preach to the choir. It was about learning and then leaving with kind of like a mission, like take some action. So we decided with our board people who were there to, the legislative panel said, when, the best way to get a hold of them is either by postcard or a couple short sentences, face-to-face meeting, either go to Des Moines or have coffee with them. And what we did. So we invited 2 of our legislators 2 weeks ago, I guess, no, about 2 weeks ago, or a week ago it was. And we sat down here in church for a couple hours, and we just visited, like, what can we do to make your job easier? How can we get our point across, the concerns that we have, because we're a very diverse group here, about environment and things. And they said also to send, short notes. We send an email, send a short one with your name, where you're from. And, the sad thing about the best thing you can do is vote. And almost, we kind of left the field with the feeling like that's the only thing you can do right now. Because some of these things are decided before it even goes to committee, I guess. And there's some things that we're very concerned about. We may learn about more tonight a little bit too, but, so, and also to encourage people that haven't voted for a while. Maybe just giving up on the idea of doing that. Get out and vote. It's very, very, very important. So we need to be advocates for what we do for our birds and insects and all the other things. And I think that's about all I have right now. I wanted to say again, what are you seeing out there right now? Chuck told me, believe it or not, but collecting sap for maple syrup, there are about 2,000 gallons a day.
No, 1,200.
That's what you got today.
No, we've got 400 today.
Okay,
400.
I stand corrected. That's a lot of sap, anyway, 1,200 gallons. About 2 weeks early, How many have been seeing bluebirds? We had some on our bluebird surveys that we did. Completed those now, the routes that we've done. Bird numbers overall have been pretty low, pretty down. We think it's maybe from, drought. Affects the insect populations, affects the amount of pollination and pollinate, the food sources, either seed production or the sugars and things that they need. So that may be part of a reason, or a combination of a lot of things, loss of habitat and other things too. We're hopeful that'll turn around. Boy, it is dry out there. No doubt. What else you seen out there? Yes.
I had two bald eagles sharing a snack on the ice in the front of this other thing.
Right by the dome there, yeah, by that pond, yeah.
One flew in and another one flew in.
They love those dead fish. It's a good place to find. Right.
I don't know if the group know it or not, but the saw owl out by the bird feeder, it's out there. It's kind of, was out there yesterday, I don't know if the group knew that now.
The saw-whet owl out of George Wood,
Yeah, it's out there.
yeah. But near the bird feeder, it's kind of like a beaten path.
I saw 6 swans, just below the Sioux Falls Dam, just below the Vesey Bridge. And we still had snow on the ground, there was some dust that you're skiing.
Yeah,
There were 3 pairs there.
look, I haven't seen one yet this year, but they should be around. Bobby, if I've seen them flying by your place at all, swans?
Few, but not many yet.
Not many yet. They come, yeah.
6 swans on the Shell Rock River by the former Boy Scout camp. It's now Tozonic Recreation Area. That was on Saturday. And we heard a saw-whet owl up by our cabin in Albuquerque County.
I yet to hear one of those. I thought to go up there at like 11 o'clock at night and visit. Come on.
Killdeer, and I know they come in, but this is pretty good.
I had one a week ago. Yep, I was surprised.
Kid saw a pileated woodpecker at their place by Denver, not too far from Craig and Chris.
Oh,
How common are they? Do many people see them?
there's in some spots, they're in the big woods areas, we have them in Hartman Reserve. Some people will get them at a feeder every now and then, but we're seeing more and more of those. And I think, and woodpeckers in general, because of the ash borer, on the dead trees, food source, for them. So, Hartman Reserve is a good area to look for them. Right there. And I've seen woodpeckers going wild lately, and downs chasing each other, and they're getting ready. Anything else anybody would like to share? Yes.
I seen about 15 swans go over the Washburn Heights last Wednesday,
Oh,
and then there was 3 more north of us.
that'd be a good place to start doing a walk again over on the bike trail at Gilbertville. It's a nice place to go in Washburn and that area. Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing, and I'm really super excited to have Connie Mutel with us tonight. I've heard her speak at a couple of different places. I think it was Iowa Prairie Network maybe, or she's a very diverse person and a really good speaker. And so happy that she came all the way over here. She's, as you may know from her reading, her bios, I think she's an award-winning author. And I think she's written maybe her last book is what she said, but you've said this a couple of times now, and then ends up writing another one. And was an award winner as a nature champion. One of those state nature champions at the Nature Summit this year, which is a big deal on top of other awards that she's received as well. I think one of the books, is it this one or the other one had a nature writing award? Which one's that? This one here that we're talking about. And Connie has a number of those over there for sale, and they're it's a really good book with a lot of stories in it. And from a variety of people about positive things that are doing, things we need to be concerned about. And I'm not gonna say any more because I don't want to steal her thunder because she has a lot to say and in a good way. So we'll leave with some hope and some good information and remember to pick up one of those books if you haven't. It's one of the better reads I've had for a while. And they're silent auction. So with that, we'll get Connie's microphone turned on, make sure it works. And we'll welcome her to the stage here.
People can hear. I'm just really glad to be here. I do give talks to different groups of people, but when you're in a group of people that love nature, there's a certain energy that I can just feel. And it's, you know, I feel like I'm home here with you. So, let's see here. Get a few things here set up. Yeah, Todd mentioned that the legislature is moving forward. And you probably know this Friday is the first funnel. So it's a good time to kill bad bills and it's a good time to advocate for the good bills. There are a couple of those out there. I bet a lot of people in this room know this book by Jim Dinsmore, A Country So Full of Game on Iowa's Wildlife. Do you know this? Yeah, I wanted to say there's a sequel. If you know this book, it's wonderful. It's stories about the animals that we used to have here. And Jim is now retired and his son, Stephen Dinsmore, is an ornithologist at Iowa State, the same department that his dad was in. And the two of them together put this book out, which just came out a week ago. And so I thought I'd bring my copy along. Iowa's Changing Wildlife, 3 decades of gain and loss. So this came out 3 decades ago. Great basic book. And now here they say, okay, what's happened in the last 30 years? So I wanted to point this out to you. It's a good story, good book. And other things, I do have some books over there for sale. It's a really complicated system. There's a box there. Ooh,
You're good.
I'm good?
Yep.
There's a box there and you can throw a $20 bill in the box and walk away. Or a check made out to me. I did bring along just a couple books that I have. Are you sure this is on?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not echoing so much. That's great. The Emerald Horizon, the History of Nature in Iowa, which is Iowa's basic natural history. And I just thought I had them in the closet. I brought them along. If you want that, you can get that for $20 too. The books are, that's a discount on both of the books, but that's kind of the story that I think that's really my best book. But tonight I'm here to talk about this book, Tending Iowa's Land, Pathways to a Sustainable Future. And I'm going to talk about this book. But I'm not really here to talk about, well, first let me tell you, my friend said that I should say, before I give this talk, and I tried to talk fast and get through it because it's a lot of information. She said, Connie, it's a great talk, but there are so many ideas in it. Tell your readers what to listen for beforehand. So there are 3 main ideas, and the talk kind of follows this outline. First of all, that Iowa 200 years ago was an incredible wilderness that was unrivaled, really, in the continent and throughout many places in the world for its abundance of species, its diversity of species, and its productivity. Idea number 1. 2, in the last 200 years, starting in the 1830s, when the first Euro-American settlers came in to the area around Iowa City, there's been a dramatic change. And that change has resulted in the environmental problems that we're facing today. And 3, there is hope for the future. So those are the 3 ideas. They're all things that I've thought about for a long time. and we'll talk about today. So today is about this book, but really, it works. You know, I'm gonna kind of stand here so I can see what's up there. Really, what I want to talk about is the environmental problems that our whole globe is facing. Because I think that all of you know these problems and are uneasy about them. I had somebody just before I stepped up here come up and, you know, just think of this MLS that we have. Now, because we know there are a lot of big problems that the globe as a whole is facing. And so I want to use this book to talk about how we face global problems. And we know that environmental problems were blatant in the year 2023. We had a lot of broken records that were stemming from the fact that 2023 was the warmest temperature on record, and we had a higher average temperature in the last year than we've had here on this planet in the last 100,000 years. The carbon dioxide levels that we have now go back, I can't remember, it's millions, I don't remember numbers, but much longer than 100,000 years. And if you look at this graph, you'll see the bar that's going up at the very end there. That's the global average temperature that we've had last year, 2023. The temperature, this is from 1850, about 100 years ago, 100 years after the Industrial Revolution started. But this was really before the Industrial Revolution started, you know, kind of got a lot of movement to it. And you'll see that until the 1940s, 1950s, about the time that I was born, the temperatures were still below the long-term global average. Starting in the 1950s, they started to go up. Around the 1980s, when our sons entered this world in our family, they started to really go up as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere rose. And last year, the temperatures were 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the long-term global average, like a lot. But it was enough to produce tremendous changes in the earth. High ocean temperatures around Key West, the ocean temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Record Canadian wildfires, record Arctic and Antarctic melts. In the Amazon River, the dolphins were dying because of the heat in the river. The water was too hot for them, it was killing them. Record billion-dollar weather disasters, the record number of billion-dollar weather disasters. In the United States, we had 28. I don't remember what the last number was, but this was considerably higher than the number we had in previous years. Globally, 63, both of those are all-time records. If somebody says to you, we can't afford to address climate change, try to remember this. How many of these, you know, with the numbers steeply rising, how many of these can be paid for? And I will say that, I think it was just yesterday, I heard that January was another record high. So last year's January was a record high. This year's record or average was higher than last year. So the temperatures are going up rapidly. This is a big problem. It's something that's scaring, I think even, I won't use the word scaring, but that climate scientists are talking about, well, are we having a sudden acceleration of climate change because of the tremendous increases? And we have to ask what's happening and why, and what can we do about it here in Iowa? And that's where my writing comes in. What I wanted to say before I showed this is that I think we all have different approaches to dealing with environmental problems. And my approach has always been writing. It's what I do. I'm trained in the sciences. I'm trained as a plant ecologist. I love science. I love nature. I use that love and my passion for nature to write books. It's not what you're going to do, but all of us can do our own thing. And what these books have taught me, it's interesting when I look back, my first two books on nature here in Iowa were about 1990. And they address the nature in the western part of Iowa in the West Hills. And those were pure description. At that time, when I wrote those two books, I thought, well, if we just describe nature to Iowa, to people, they'll see how wonderful it is and they'll respond, right? And everybody will get excited and go out and do good things for nature. Well, doesn't really work that way. And then by the time the Emerald Horizon came out, I was writing, which was that was published 2008. I was writing about the problems that were created when Iowa was transformed from a wilderness, like is shown on this here, a wilderness of oak savanna and prairies, to an agricultural land. And the thing is that I look back with embarrassment now because I barely mentioned climate change in that book. It just wasn't on the radar. Well, a few years later, I did something on flooding in Iowa. That was the year, 2008 was the year of the big 2008 floods in eastern Iowa. And then a few years after that, started to work on the climate change book. And with all these books together, what I realized is that I was, by giving talks, writing a lot about it, thinking about these subjects, I have put together a picture of what's happened here in Iowa, how nature has changed, why it's changed. And I wanted to get that out. And that was the reason that I started that book, Bringing Iowa's Land, to try to put the whole picture together. It's an edited book with 28 authors, about 300 pages. Its claim to fame is that it's the first comprehensive examination of our environmental problems. Now, I understand you had Neil Hamilton speaking to you recently, is that right?
Yes.
And Neil has two books that have come out in the last couple of years. One is The River Knows, we know what, and the second one is The One Remembers, came out a couple of years ago. Neil's books are complements to this one. This is the science. It talks about the science of what's going on. Neil's books talk about the policies and the social factors that have created those environmental problems. And then the third book that's come out recently is a book by Chris Jones. You probably all heard about that, the Swine Republic, and then so many people heard about that. Anyway, that book looks very intensively at what's happened here in Iowa in the last 50 years. So these are three different looks at all of our environmental problems. But this book is the only one that takes a comprehensive examination, especially about the details of our environmental problems. It's science-based. It's divided into four sections: soil, water, the changing climate, and the loss of biodiversity. And these are our four big areas of concern. It talks about history and it talks about agriculture. I'm not saying that agriculture is the source of all of our problems, but because agriculture is the dominant factor, the dominant feature in Iowa, that's what this book looks at. It looks at the history of our environmental problems, the history of nature, and the history of agriculture, and it tries to tie those all together. I've had a lot of students when I give talks, and adults too say to me, well, not adults about this, but students come up and say, you know, I just graduated with an environmental science major, and all I heard about were the problems. I never heard about solutions. It's been really depressing. And I don't feel that's fair. I don't feel that's fair to anybody who reads literature or anybody I've talked to. So this book in a very concerted way, looks at solutions and alternative visions, hopeful visions for the future, because they do exist. It's positive, it encourages action. And it did win a book award this last year, which I was pleased with. But still, why a book about Iowa? Well, here it is in a thumbnail. In the last 200 years, Iowa went from a biologically diverse, resilient, sustainable wilderness, as I said, one of the most extreme productive wildernesses on the continent, into a simplified, intensively used, high energy input farmscape. This has been one of history's most rapid and extreme land transformations. That transformation is the genesis of many of our environmental problems. But the thing is that similar transformations are now happening around the world with similar results. And when I started to work on this new book, the person who was writing the agricultural history section for the University of Iowa State said to me, You know, the thing is, is an extreme now. I mean, our industrial agriculture is an extreme. It's a model for the world about how to come in with, may I say, a heavy hand and use the land to produce, to maximize productivity and maximize profit. That's what we do here now. The thing is, she said that everybody else is now following this model, right? We set the trends. But Iowa remains now the only place that can solve those problems. We got educated farmers. We've got, yeah, I'm sorry that whatever I'm doing. We've got educated farmers. We've got a land grant institution. We've got research going on here. We've got money to solve the problems. We've got money to buy fertilizers and money to figure out how to not use fertilizers. We've got government supporting what we do. If we can't solve those problems here in Iowa, then nobody can. So what we have to do now, we modeled industrial agriculture, the world is adopting it. What we need to do now is develop ways to work with the land and explore those ways as well. So to understand and examine Iowa's land history, let's look at what's happened, what it was like before settlement. At Iowa in 1800, when Iowa was 80% tall grass prairie, the rest of the state was oak woodlands and wetlands. This nice mushy, wet soil. 25% of Iowa was hydric soil. Were scattered throughout the prairies and the woodlands. Focusing on the prairies because they were the most extensive ecosystem. They were about 9,000 years old. They migrated back in from the southwest and the southeast after the melting of the last glaciers. And in that last 9,000 years, they've had time, all of the species that came back in, you know, migrating northward slowly, to evolve an intricate species interactions and codependencies. So they had the time, basically, to learn how to live together. And because of that, they have developed complex life support functions and what we call ecosystem services. The prairies, let's say, learned, being a little bit anthropomorphic, how to store carbon in the soil, how to make soil that can grow new life, how to protect organisms living underneath the ground surface, how to trade carbon dioxide for oxygen, how to decompose waste, how to give safe haven to migrating organisms. Dozens of ecosystem services, and the ecosystems were very productive, tremendously with tremendous abundance and diversity. The productivity could be measured by the numbers of birds that were exported from settlement era Iowa, that were put into wooden oak kegs and shipped off to the restaurants in Chicago and south to St. Louis by the millions, the birds that were gleaned from the prairies. Tremendous abundance, 1,000 species of vascular, higher flowering plants in the tall grass prairie biome, 1,000 species. And diversity as well. And all of, oh, well, I just said diversity, but the abundance, I was going to remember a few quotes from the settlement era journals that I read. Quotes, for example, where people said, we can go out in the potholes in north central Iowa and fill our boat with pelican eggs and bring them back to eat because the pelican nests were so abundant there. And one quote where the long-billed curlews were migrating over Iowa City, small Iowa City, for so long at night, for hours and at night, because the populations were so big that people couldn't sleep because they kept them awake. And we all know the stories of the passenger pigeons, which were so abundant that they would fly overhead and shade the ground underneath them for days at a time. The most numerous vertebrate animal on the continent. So these ecosystems with all of these interactions and codependencies were self-perpetuating. They were kind of like a clock that never needed winding. The ecosystems could continue to produce and foster life and produce the same types of life that they have done for thousands of years. It's kind of a miracle. I mean, if you think about a cornfield, the cornfield lives for 5 or 6 years, 500, don't live, 5 or 6 months, and then it's gone. But these ecosystems knew how to do it for thousands of years. Self-perpetuating. The soils, the water, and the climate and biodiversity were all very special, and we're going to talk about those next. The soils were formed from the deep root masses. Soils, the roots were 10 to 20 feet deep in the soil. And those root masses, well, the roots were the carbon dioxide that the plants pulled out of the atmosphere, formed with the energy from photosynthesis into long chain hydrocarbons, and then shunted underground into these root masses. And that organic matter stayed in the soil and decomposed and formed the organic rich soil that the settlers first found when they came here. High in organic matter. The soil was fluffy. It was half water, half solid and half air. So that if you, for example, if a 16-inch rain, well, you probably didn't have 16-inch rains back then. But if one would fall on a healthy prairie, the prairie would soak up 8 inches of that moisture. I mean, just amazing. Topsoils were 16 inches average depth, the richest soils on Earth. When the settlers came here, 1/4, 25% of the world's best soils were found right here within Iowa's borders. They were called Iowa's black gold. They were the basis, as you know, of our economy and of our culture. The ecosystem services that these complex soils produce, well, first of all, the prairies made the soil, but the soil then provided food and shelter for the above ground plants and animals, but also for the billions of microorganisms and macro large organisms that lived underneath the soil. The bacteria, fungi, insects, they were called tropical rainforests, upside down by some. And you've probably heard the quote that if you have a tablespoon of healthy soil, topsoil, there are over 1 billion microorganisms in that tablespoon. I mean, incredible abundance, almost unbelievable. 10 times as many organisms underneath the ground surface as above the ground surface. The soils also were inextricably tied to water. The two were one unit. The soils, as I said, were a giant sponge that could soak up abundant water. And because they could do that, the water ran not over the soil surface, but down into the soil, and then laterally through the soil. And as it ran through the ground, the water would be cleansed if it did have pollutants or sediments or whatever. This is called an infiltration hydrology, and this is one of the major things that we've lost with our agriculture. This soil that's going down into the soil, infiltration or consumption hydrology. The soil cleansed and stored the water, held it for long periods of time, so that water's flow was slow. If the water is soaked into the soil at the top of the hill, it might not reach the bottom of the hill and the soil at the bottom of the hill for weeks. If the soil held soil particles tightly, and thus erosion was uncommon. So the stream flows were still and steady, and flooding was moderate. So that doesn't mean it never happened, but we didn't have flash floods like we do now. The wetlands fostered a tremendous diverse, well, the wetlands themselves were tremendously diverse. There were streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, potholes, etc., prairie potholes, seed plugs, sluice bends, and all of those different wetlands fostered a tremendous diversity of wetland plants, animals, and microorganisms. Climate was also shaped by the soils. So you remember that graph, well, you didn't, I could have showed you another graph that showed that the carbon dioxide levels have stayed under 300 parts in the atmosphere, have stayed under 300 parts per million for tens of thousands of years. And that was because much of the carbon dioxide that was produced by when we breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide, and other such processes, that carbon dioxide was again trapped by plants and trapped by the soils. And I think that the soils here, you can see the front part is the top of the prairie grass, and the soils, you can, the roots themselves went deep and went thick, way 10 to 20 feet deep. But you know that now when we talk about climate change, we talk about planting trees, right? And then the idea is that the trees are going to capture carbon dioxide and make it into big tree trunks. And those tree trunks are going to be carbon storage mechanisms, okay? Well, the prairies did the same things, but they stored the carbon dioxide underneath the soil. But they were very effective carbon trappers and storers. The dense living prairie plants pumped carbon dioxide, hence pumped the carbon underground and stored the carbon in the roots as organic matter. And thus it helped control atmospheric CO2 level. And through that, the prairies helped control the climate. So that's where the carbon sink, 2/3 of the plant's biomass, living plant material, were underneath the ground, more underneath the ground than was above the ground. And the other thing is that this climate that was produced in this way was a favorable climate for grasses, the prairie grasses, was a climate that was warm in the summer, with steady rains, slow rains. There was a dry period in the spring, a dry period in the fall. There weren't big gushing rains. The floods were moderated. That was the climate that the settlers first came to, that helped them establish corn and other annual crops here, well, all of the crops, as something that was very precious to them. And that's the climate that we're losing now. I think you're probably aware. So what about biodiversity? We talk about soils, water, and climate. Well, the soil and the water and the climate all nourish many, many life forms. For thousands of years, the species and processes evolved to form a tightly woven cloth of interdependencies. And my mother was a weaver. And so when I was trying to think of a metaphor, I thought, well, you know, the weaving, when you weave something nice and tight, it doesn't come unraveled, right? And that was what the ecosystems were like. They survived because of all of the dependencies, all the interactions that they had, that guaranteed life and perpetuity to diverse species and communities. They were sustainable, resilient means they could bounce back. You give them a punch, you give them a couple of years of drought, and the next year they bounce back again. But then, starting in the 1830s, this is tricky, but I have to be careful. Starting in the 1830s, the Euro-American settlement initiated the unraveling of that cloth. So, I'm going to divide this into 3 periods. The first one is the 1830s to the 1900s, which is the falling of the prairie. From the start, the land provided 3 resources. When the settlers came here, they had gain in abundance. They had abundant harvest, almost unbelievably abundant harvest, because the soil was so rich, they could just drop seeds in and it would produce a crop. And they had prairie pastures like this prairie in the forefront here of this picture to feed their cattle. They were kind of walked into a very nice functioning system. But from the start, the goal was not to utilize that system in perpetuity, but instead to import the ecosystems, the farming systems that they knew from Europe or from the East, which were simplified farming systems with domesticated species. So it was a different goal. To do so, they had to remove the native prairies, the woodlands and the wetlands that had fed them in abundance at the beginning. And they did so in many ways. Each way that they did this was unraveling this cloth of native interdependencies. They overgrazed their lands. We got barbed wire in Iowa starting in, I think it was the 1870s or 1880s, extensive pastures, which led to the overgrazing, tiled the wetlands. This was in the 1880s, amazingly fast. Soon those clay pipes started to drain especially Des Moines Road and north central Iowa. Logged the woodlands. People say that virtually every mature tree in Iowa was cut. And all of these, we removed native plants and animals, right? This is the definition of biodiversity destruction. They just took away the systems that were there. But plowing the prairie was by far the biggest thing. The biggest changes were made by plowing the prairie. Am I doing something wrong here?
Moving the mouse.
Click on.
Plowing the prairie, most of the prairies were gone by 1900. The results were that in the soils, the organisms were killed. Remember, the organisms in that rich prairie soil were so abundant and so diverse, and they actually started to die. Because as soon as you plowed the prairie and exposed the prairie to air and to sunlight and to drought, the organisms that were exposed would die. The structure of the soil was compacted by animals, degraded. That means that the organisms started to die and all those nice air spaces started to disappear. The organic matter was lost. If you call anything, if you want something to decompose, you put it someplace where oxygen can get out, and the carbon dioxide in the organisms will combine with the oxygen in this atmosphere and disappear into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. That's decomposition, the basic definition of decomposition. And that's what happened in the rich prairie soils here. The soils could no longer absorb and hold moisture because they were compacted, compressed. So with the water, the infiltration hydrology through the soil changed to surface runoff, right? Water coming down, going off the surface of the soil. And that led to soil erosion because as soon as you have groundwater running over the surface of the soil, it can carry soil and other pollutants downhill, which led to water pollution in the streams and flashier floods, which led to flooding. With the climate, the soil organic matter that had been stored underground was released, oxidized, released as carbon dioxide, which contributed to climate change back in the 1800s. And biodiversity, big biodiversity loss, because the native plants, animals, and soil organisms and the ecosystem services that they had fostered all decreased or disappeared. This was the initiation of our environment. From 1900 to 1950, the work animals were released, were traded in for fossil fuels for machinery that ran on fossil fuels. Horses replaced the tractors, muscle power replaced fossil fuels. And that led to increased carbon dioxide contributions. Now you have carbon dioxide, not just from the soils, but also from the fossil fuels that were being burned. And most prairie pastures and hay fields were lost to croplands because the farmers no longer needed the pastures and the hay fields to feed their work animals.
Good on you.
There we go.
Just had to get off.
1950 to the present, specialization, intensification, and industrialization. This is the big story of what's happened in my lifetime. I was born just a few years after World War II. And in my lifetime, we've had a total redefinition of what it means to be in agriculture here in Iowa. Everything got bigger. This is a huge story. This is 10 books in itself, but in one slide or 2 slides, everything got bigger. We have bigger fields now. The farms themselves are bigger, so we have fewer farmers farming the land. The number of cattle per farmer has increased from, a herd of maybe a couple hundred at the most to tens of thousands of chickens or hogs in one farm. And the machines got bigger, increased mechanization, bigger and fancier machines continually being developed. And the big thing here with livestock is that the livestock left the pastures. I had one author who I hope I can remember this quote, he said, what we're used to is having animals that walk to the grass and eat the grass. And now we put them in confinement buildings and hold them still, and we expect the grass to walk to the cattle to be eaten. And, you know, I mean, it seems absurd when you think about it, but the thing is that once you have tens of thousands of animals in one concentration, you have huge problems with their wastes and the wastes leaking and washing into rivers and the lakes. So some people say, I don't know if this is really true, I think we can conflicting people, but some people say that we just don't have enough soil here in Iowa to absorb all of the, you know, that's produced by a large number of animals. Corn and beans is what we got now. 2/3 of Iowa is covered by these two crops. And the problem with corn and beans is that they leave the soil bare for the majority of the year. You know, they cover the soil, they're growing in the soil, they provide some cover for maybe 5 months or so. The rest of the year, the soil is left bare, and you have the soil degrading with erosion and with oxidation, and all sorts of things that will kill any remaining microorganisms in the soil itself. Synthetic chemicals, big deal since World War II. The big one here is the nitrogen fertilizers. We now put 4 billion pounds a year, 4 billion pounds of nitrogen fertilizer on Iowa's farmland a year. We're the biggest contributor to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico because of the amount that we put on the soil. And many people don't realize that nitrogen fertilizer feeds the crops. But there's other two things that are wrong with it. One, besides the water pollution, one is that the nitrates actually kill microorganisms. They're toxic. So if you put nitrogen fertilizer on your field, if there are whatever remaining microbes that are in the soil are being killed by the applications to the soil. It's kind of an ironic circle, right? Because you need the nitrogen because you don't have the microorganisms, but the nitrogen you put on the soil to fertilize the soil is killing the microorganisms that you need to fertilize the soil. And it's a bad negative circle. And the last thing is that the nitrates that are released into the atmosphere are very potent. They're short-term but potent greenhouse gases. So that intensifies climate change, of course. Other synthetic chemicals, we have the fertilizers, but we also have pesticides, we have fungicides, herbicides, insecticides that we put on the soil. And then we have all of the things that we give to the cattle that have to be treated with chemicals because they're living so close together that they, you know, we live through COVID, we know that we can't pack people in a room without getting them transmitting diseases, and that's what happens with the cattle as well. So you treat them with antibiotics, growth hormones, and all sorts of other things. And all of those chemicals, of course, go into the water. Government policies and subsidies, all you have to think about is the subsidies that we pay out for ethanol right now, how much that's shaping farming here in Iowa. And farms are considered industrial businesses. We're looking at economies of scale, not quality of living, but economies of scale, productivity, and profit out of the buzzwords for much of farming. But I want to impress on you that this is not everyone in Iowa at all. Many of you, I'm sure, know people or know of people that are impractical farmers of Iowa. Farmers that are doing wonderful experimentation, working with CSAs and producing grass-fed beef and all sorts of ways of living sustainably and living well on the land. There's another good organization called I'm not going to remember the name again, but there's one in Minnesota that's called the Climate Land Leaders. This is an organization of farmers who are farming specifically to make their farms trap carbon dioxide. So many people who are doing alternatives. These are the biggest and the most industrialized farmers, but they're not all the farmers in the world. So the results of all of these extremes that we just mentioned is that our problems are driven to extremes and new problems are added. So the soils have erosion and compaction today, like they had before, but they've got more erosion and compaction because they're dropped. with two, crop over and over and over. And they're left bare much of the year. The soils degrade because of the toxic chemicals, the organic matter is lost in the water. Again, we have surface runoff with a lot of pollution, as with new pollutants being added to the water, we have with flashier, water flows and thus more floods, and the floods are larger, new chemical pollutants, and the big one, confined animal feeding operation, manure, and climate change with the oxidation of the soil organics and carbon dioxide released both from the soil and from fossil fuels. And more intense climate change, what climate change is doing in Iowa is producing more intense rains, floods, and heat and extreme weather, and all of those intensify the other problems that we mentioned. Biodiversity loss is the net result of all of these problems. The native plants and animals and soil microorganisms are lost, as are the ecosystem services. In summary, we've stripped away very healthy woodlands and wetlands, and we've gained corn, soybeans, biofuels, and capos, but at a cost. We've lost about half of our topsoil, half of our topsoil depth. The soils that remain in places are called dead. They are severely degraded in many places. Water quality, as I've said already, some of the worst in the country, and extreme quantities, more floods, fewer floods. Loss of biodiversity, and this is taken again where we have extreme, large expanses of corn and beans, loss of biodiversity, some people call these biological deserts. Ecosystem services are lost. The remaining areas in Iowa are about 10%, and large loss of healthy woodlands and wetlands as well. And loss of that predictable nurturing climate that we used to have when the settlers first came here. And the climate change intensifies all other stresses. Agriculture is the source of about 30% of Iowa's greenhouse gas emissions. In the nation as a whole, agriculture is 10%, but here in Iowa, about a third of our greenhouse gases are produced by agriculture. And Iowa's problems are the world's, and the world's are Iowa's. And this is just the Mississippi River courses, and that's producing the dead zone belt. So that complex self-sustaining trade cloth has been unraveled. There are multiple crisis points now. Climate change is really the elephant in the bathtub, but we're also really getting to crisis points with our soils, our water, and our loss of biodiversity. So where do we go from here? Before I talk about that, I want to say a few basic things. These are things that are so obvious, but I think people don't always remember them or say them out loud. So I can say them. The natural world is not peripheral. You all love birds, you love bird watching. Those birds are not just put there for your pleasure. They have a function. The function is holding the world together, supporting life. Nature's diversity and functions are the basis of life on Earth and critical to survival. Here's a quote from biologist Theo Wilson. If we were to wipe out insects alone on this planet, the rest of life and humanity with it would mostly disappear from the land within a few months. Today's problems are not natural. These are the result of our actions. They didn't characterize Iowa before the 1800s. Our problems are part of larger global trends. We are not alone in our struggles. Here, that graph over there is a graph that correlates increase in human population. We're a little bit over 8 billion people now. When I was born, we were about 2.3 billion. Still is going up. And the other curve is the extinction rate. But we could put very similar curves there for greenhouse gas emissions, rising temperature, decrease in flood, decrease in water quality, and the like. All of the problems are showing that exponential growth rate. And just as we cause the problems, we also can and must address them. Here's the important thing to note. Remember, we know what to do, but current actions are not sufficient. So what can we do? Well, I'm going to talk about this in terms of the book again. When I was land, I'm going to talk about things that I learned while editing Tendon that might inform your thoughts and actions. And part of this is kind of a ploy to say, you know, it doesn't matter how old we get, we keep learning and we keep coming up, and we as a species can keep learning and figuring out new ways to go. One way is going to be learning how to do this. I'm going to learn that. First of all, we can educate and advocate. And this is, of course, I want to, you know, I'm kind of an academic, I teach, right? I write and I teach. And so I wanted to educate my audiences, and I knew that to do that, I would have to have a simple orderly section, a simple orderly structure, because you can imagine I was sitting in my office during COVID thinking about all this stuff, and it was just a jumble in my head. And the only way that I could get a grasp on this was to start to divide the problems up into different sections. And then what I did, within each section, I had 4 chapters, 4 sections, 4 chapters in each. Nice and orderly. You know, once you create order, once you clean your house, you feel better, right? Once I cleaned this up, I felt better. But the important thing was that I realized after I learned so much stuff from my authors and from working with this material, that the book structure was also educating me. I understood, I'd always known that there was strong links between nature and agriculture. But when I was working with this material, I realized that they were just bound together, like with iron chains. And there were interactions among the problems. All of the problems were tied to all of the other problems. So, for example, if you plow the prairie, you get soil erosion, which means the soils are degraded, which means you need fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer, which means you get water pollution, right? So everything comes along. One thing does the next. They just keep spinning off of each other. Or if you plow the prairie, it releases carbon dioxide, which increases climate change, which intensifies storms, which increases precipitation, which leads to soil degradation and biodiversity loss. But here's the thing that was almost miraculous that I realized. There are also interconnections among the solutions. If you plant a prairie, you build soils, which means you increase carbon dioxide storage and you hold more water in the soil, which means you decrease floods and water pollution, and you start rebuilding biodiversity. And the thing here, you know, if you're going and talking to your legislators, I keep thinking this would be a wonderful thing if our legislators could understand this. We're not looking at discrete entities at all. The whole thing in our society and in our ecosystem is the interconnections we have. Okay, the interconnections we have with each other, with nature. So that if we can say, here's our big ball of problems here in Iowa. We've got all these problems with water and soil and everything. It's just overwhelming. It just depresses me. And you take a syringe and you say you're a doctor and you squirt in some medicine in one place that almost doesn't matter where you put it. Because whatever starts changing in that one place is going to start spinning off benefits every place else. So if you want to start addressing climate change, get farm programs that put more carbon dioxide into the soil, right? Or if you wanted to do those farm things in the put more carbon in the soil, but you don't care about nature, you don't even have to worry if the legislature don't care about nature, because the nature will come back on itself as long as we start getting these in the right direction. Address one problem, you address them all. This is empowering. And that led to the book's major theme. We need to reintroduce nature into agriculture for the benefit of both. Neither agriculture nor nature can live on their own. So next, make material accessible, and that meant working into getting all these 28 authors to tell first-person stories. this was difficult with academics. They used to like to talk about themselves and they sure didn't want to tell stories. But that was the rule that they had to begin their chapter with a person's story, end the chapter with a person's story. And what that led to was a sense of the readers got pulled in by those stories. And I've had people say to me that they picked up the book and they actually kept reading it, which is always wonderful for somebody who's edited a big book, but they couldn't put it down because of the stories keep engrossing you in the story. This is just a little quote from the person who was writing about solutions to flooding. Every day as a boy, I would walk out into the farm fields in the late afternoon to bring in our herd of dairy cows. I mean, how can you put that down? You just are wondering what this little boy is going to be doing. And he goes on to describe how he stopped to play in the creeks and then how that took him to a career in hydrology. And by the way, this is what he figured out in his research. Encourage action and hope. Again, don't forget about those students that are out there hearing all of the bad stuff. Between the chapters, I wanted to put essays by environmental activists because, if you have all just science chapters, one after the other, it gets heavy. It can't help but get heavy, even if they're well read, well written. But what we started to do after, maybe halfway through the project is to inset essays by activists. These were farmers that are farming right. There's one by a wildlife rehabilitator, one by somebody who started Project Aware, all sorts of people that are doing exciting good things, people who are restoring the land, preserving the land. And these essays are just a few pages, but they are really full of passion and energy, and they kind of touch the reader up and then fill the reader, spit the reader out into the next heavier chapter and keep the book going. The short essays are positive, they add energy and light to the book and draw readers forward. And fourth, affirm visions and solutions. I wanted at the end of each section, each of the 4 sections, I have something called a vision for the future. It's somebody not living in the past, which talks about what we've done wrong and where we are, with all those problems now. Instead, it poses the point down the road, the place that you can barely see, but the place that you want to get to if your wildest dreams come true. And so for the soil chapter, the author talked about regenerative agriculture, which is how can we do farming right? We get animals back on the soils, we cover and protect the soils, we have cover crops, cover crops, and no-till agriculture, pollinator strips and the like. And if you do regenerative agriculture, you can get 90% of the soil, out of the water before the water gets to streams. For example, we have other benefits. Water, the water vision for the future talks about saving the floodplains with floods, and building structures, how to build water structures on mountains. Just if somebody get water, please. The climate section talks, of course, about electrical. And it also talks about how to deal with nitrogen, fertilizer, methane, and how to do better education for our college students who are going to be the ones that are dealing with these problems. And biodiversity loss talks about restoring our ecosystems and getting 30% of Iowa's land back in natural features by 2030, and the author writes a very convincing summary of how we can do that. These visions things. These are visions and solutions that generate hope and action, and hope and action are certainly the best antidote for despair. And then lastly, I think we really have to recognize the grief and the fear of our current times. I learned this from my authors, because when we did readings, the first couple of readings that we did, we had several authors coming up. And several of the authors started to cry. They'd stand up and they'd be about to read from their book. And one of them, you know, a scientist that I respect very much, you know, a guy that doesn't show his emotions. And he just started talking. He said, you know, I'm gonna read from my chapter, but I'm gonna tell you the truth. When I wake up in the morning, he's a farmer, he was a farmer, so I wake up 4 o'clock every morning and I think, what can I do to make the world better for my parents? And I don't come up with very many good answers. And then he paused for a minute, and he went on to say, but here's what I do. And he just talked eloquently about his actions to restore the ecosystem and restore the house. And I think that sharing that belief, as well as our hopes for the future, is really important. We're walking into an unknown future. We're rewriting right now the future of life on Earth. It's frightening, overwhelming, depressing. We need to share our solutions and efforts, but we also need to share our feelings. Because I mean, to be honest, I do. And I share my feelings and it really helps. So we need to tend our land and our connections and take care of ourselves. I'm going to skip this. These are things that I thought, if anybody wants, I'll go back to them. But, you know, we all can do things. You guys know what to do. You know about writing to the legislators. I love Tom's comments about trying to get to visit with them. We know we have to get our benefits, all them to make sure our kids, and we need to talk to others. We need to explain that nature is not political. It's not like something you can go and buy at Walmart. It's something that undergirds everything that gives us life. We just need to talk and think and let ourselves talk with others. So in closing, my effort to try to save the world, I grew up in the 60s, what else can I say? Was writing a book that I think it's a good book. It's engaging, it's energizing, it stresses solutions, feeds hope, and fuels active engagement. But my hope for you is that you become more engaged with Iowa's natural environment. In a big way or a small way, either way, because we all have different ways. Any small thing is steering the world toward a better future. And by doing that here up in Cedar Falls, you will be addressing our global problems as well. So, thank you. I've been going with talking and it's hard for me to bring myself.
Questions, that time for?
Well, I've got to say, if you want us to get one.
Questions or comments?
Would you talk a little bit more about the 30-30?
Sure, I'd love to. This is actually part of President Biden's summit. Action platforms, and now it's a part of his formal policy, and it states that we would get 30% of the world nature back to nature by the year 2030. And nature does not have to be a high quality, pristine ecosystem. It means something other than a parking lot, a school playground, big playground, or the like. It's something where birds flying over could think about, oh, maybe that's a nice place to, come down and perch for a while. Something that doesn't have to be real high quality. But what the person who wrote this is Professor Tom Rasper, the great. And he said, he went to a lot of work for this. This was a research project himself. He figured out how much land we have here in Iowa that's already natural. The Lost Hills are most of northeastern Iowa. The woodland that my husband and I are restoring in Iowa City, 16 acres. Your little prairie planting. All the parks, we have wonderful parks and trails here. If you add those together, and I don't remember the numbers, but we would come up just about, I think 6,000 or 7,000 acres shy of the 30,000. So that the 30% figures that we need And where we can find that is taking the marginal farmland. He said there's already twice as many acres in marginal farmland. That's land that shouldn't be flat farmed. It's land that's in the 2-year floodplain that floods on average every other year. And land that's too steep. If we took half of that and mixed it in with what we got on it, we'd be a 30 by 30. So it's not at all impossible. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
What could legislation do to help solve the problem?
Yeah, well, the big thing is the farm bill. You know, that sets the policies. I think the biggest thing. I have to say, I'm not real good with all of the bills and stuff, but I think maybe the biggest thing we could do, we could just get rid of ethanol subsidies, which are fueling the cutting of our remaining, you know, trees along the beach and falling off of land because of the high subsidies people get for growing that corn. Over half of our corn now goes into ethanol. And I heard a statistic just a couple of days ago. 1 acre of solar panels produces more energy than 100 acres of ethanol crops. So we're going there, you know, as soon as we're in the process of going to electrification, and we're really doing a good job of that here in Iowa, believe it or not. Once we get there, everything's going to be updated.
So you're suggesting that ethanol should be eliminated completely? Is that what I'm?
Well, yes, I am. I mean, the studies don't show that it really, what it is, it's a subsidy for farmers.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm not a farmer and I've been criticized for saying bad things about farmers. And I don't mean to do that. The farmers are doing the best they can to support themselves and their farmers and their families. But what they're doing now, you know, if we could put that subsidy into getting them to store carbon in the soil, it would be better for our climate. It would be less toxic for the environment. That's just me. If there are farmers here, then I would apologize. There are some bills that are coming up that I know people are trying to get through this first funnel. One is a bill for to encourage or to legislate buffer strips along the streams here in Iowa. And Minnesota has a very successful buffer strip bill. It works. You know, I don't remember if it's 30 or 50 feet buffers along permanent streets. Yeah, that's fine. If we could get that to be seriously considered, that would be huge. What is that? Oh, another one that's being projected by Food and Water Watch is to have permits for the peoples. You know, the peoples have to live up to certain standards. That would be good. CAPO permits. And this says, I think they're supposed to, but it's often overlooked. That's what I've been told. Food and Water Watch. It's the one. And then there's some negative things. You've probably heard of this one where this legislature was trying to be cost passed. I don't think it's going to make it out through. I don't think it's going through the funnel, but to make it illegal for putting land into public use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that voted down. It didn't go through.
I haven't heard the last, it did not go through the House, but it was almost the same bill went through the subcommittee and the Senate.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And it'll keep coming up. It's not over with yet, because even if it doesn't go through the funnel, it can reoccur
And it'll
in a
come up.
different way.
Come up.
And how these things have been working is public comment from the other side comes late. It's done closed doors and you get maybe 24 hours notice before it gets goes through. And what we're told is these things are already decided before it even goes to committee. How it's going to be voted on, and And you make a difference.
Yeah.
And we've heard, and one of the best ways again is to write a handwritten letter. Or a small postcard, and sometimes if you're not a constituent, they're not gonna talk to you, but the data gets collected. Somebody collects it and you get enough people out saying in the thousands. We've seen it with the AEA bill that we're talking about is probably not gonna go on. The education summit they had last week was packed. And there was actually a Republican there on the panel, and these, they're getting a lot of pushback because of you. And so we can make a difference. It's difficult. And as you had mentioned too, Ed, you had some list places to go about advocacy. They told us what are your best leaders? What are they doing? And why are they good leaders? Who's the, what's another way to get, who are your, lobbyists? Who are the lobbyists? One good one is Iowa Environmental Council.
Yeah.
And they have a good respect there for providing both sides. So that goes just today or yesterday, I renewed my contribution for them. Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation is a good one. So I'm following them today about a little prairie thing that's come up with thought, and Nature Conservancy. So they have a voice there too. And the Farm Bureau has a huge voice. They speak for a lot of people.
And the
Like all these
Association.
people that we are, Audubon, all the other groups also speak. And so you do have.
And the other one is the Cattlemen's Association. They are the two that come and say that the small
Yeah.
farmer does not have a chance to buy land because
We've
so much
heard
being
that,
bumped
yeah.
away. I grew up between Parkersburg and Stout, just inside of Greeley Town. All the farmers around my area to there all had cattle. They all had pasture. You go from Parkersburg to New Hartford to take the Beaver Creek all the way to where it goes down to Cedar Falls. Most all of that at one time had cattle or milk cows into it. I could show you every farmer I knew from Parkersburg to New Hartford. Well, what happened is nobody wants to take care of a bunch of cows anymore. All the top was so much of it bulldozed down the old pasture. It was farmed for a couple of years. It gets flooded, then they turn it all into CRP. I can show you 2 acres or 2 parcels. One's 24 acres and the other is 30 acres on Beaver Creek from, I say, Austinville all the way down to past New Hartford. So the DNR of the county is not part of that much land. It's all gone into either ethanol, or let's say, gone to make ethanol. Another thing is CRP.
Like Connie says, there's good groups out there. Practical Farmers of Iowa are very good. Iowa Farmers Union.
Yeah.
Soybean Association's been doing some good things. And it's growing. There's a Neiman Farms that does have the great food at the nature. Some would have hog farms and things that are free range. They have over 600 farmers now that are, and their people are buying the meat.
600 farms here in Iowa.
Yeah,
That
and
sounds
not only is just that, beef and chicken and other things, restaurants want that kind of food. So things will turn around a little bit.
Things are really exciting things are happening.
Any other questions? Yes.
I would just say, it does think, your legislator opens up their email and they're loaded, their inbox is full of that, what's in what's full. It really doesn't. The legislature. But it's a website, you want to go to legends.iowa.gov. You just go to that and see what you see. There's top links. If you don't even know who the legislators are, you can see them. Tell you who to contact, phone numbers, it's all.
But you're saying to get those and then You're saying to not email them, that's what I.
No,
Oh, to email. Yeah. Or go to the line, but Tom, did you remember that people say that the phone calls are counted, right? Phone calls are good?
everybody does it a little different,
Okay.
you know, and is what they told us. But they do keep track of, like you said, when they get 2,000 emails in a couple of days, it's noticed, and some of them try to, and they'll sit there. One was Eric Giddens from our area here, they'll sit there and try to answer as many as you can. It might take a while,
But he also said that if there emails that would look like come from a generated email that are just sent in many times, that does not have the effect of a personal note.
personal, handwritten notes, short
Email.
Well, we may have some other questions. We have some great food back there, and yes, sir.
I just wanted to make a comment on her. Had 8 billion people or something like this. All those people, all those years had heat. And that's what drove this whole process there. And margins aren't as great as they could be, so now everybody had to get bigger to carry more to make a living. And now we're at this point here where you still gotta eat somehow.
Yeah,
The problem is the ethanol though. You know, now the corn's not getting eaten anymore.
It's gonna go to fossil fuel is what took the ethanol took the place of. Benzene was one of them that you could get cancer standing next to the pump. We got rid of that, or most places did, because they use that.
Connie. You've had plenty of time to think around as you're writing, and left me with a thought that you may not be writing another book. What's a good topic for another book that hasn't been done yet?
oh,
Have you had any thought on that, lines? What's out there you can encourage the writer to think about?
here's what I'll say, because I bet there are people in this room that can do this. I feel like if I do some more writing, what I want to do is to write to the heart and to write to the spirit, because I spent my life, as I said, as an academic, trying to deal with ideas and convince people about ideas. But if we don't start to love nature and feel passionate about nature and thus care for it, you know, we would never think about crashing our kids. That we cherish them. We need to have that same cherishing for the natural world. And something that I read recently told me that, you know, we have this idea. Humanity, 200,000 years. We've been Homo sapiens 200,000 years. For almost all of that time, we were a species that lived in nature and with nature, and we cared for nature. We cared about nature, and so we took care of nature. And then we had this brief little blip, the last 150 years, when instead of being in nature and with nature, we sold ourselves more or less to two things: consumption and combustion. And he was talking, this was somebody who had written a book about fire, and he talked about fire, how fossil fuels, we burn fossil fuels, right? And that gives us all this energy. But we also are now burning the world because climate change is warming us up and burning out the world. So we have these huge fires like in plants. And he said we need to realize that we can back up from consumption and combustion and go back to caring for the world. So somehow if we can reach people and just show them, teach them, take them out, say, look at, you know, what a miracle the natural world is. I think that's one thing. And that's what I would like to try to do. The second thing, though, I think I'm a grandmother. I'm sure there are grandmothers and parents in this world, in this room, is to leave a record, no matter how simple, of the way we're living now. Because in 20, 40, 100 years, if that record survives, our progeny are gonna say, what were they thinking now? And how did they live now? What was going on at this time when we still had choices and maybe we didn't take them? And I think that if we leave those records, I think they'll be incredibly important to the future.
You might want to check your newsletter, it's coming up newsletter next month, because there's an article in there about 3 or 4 examples of how nature is helping the environment and helping reduce climate change.
Great.
You did such a good job on that.
Right.
Thank you, Connie. We really appreciate it. The sound off and heat up.